Chapter 12. As in every large household, there were at Bald Hills several perfectly distinct worlds which merged into one harmonious whole, though each retained its own peculiarities and made concessions to the others. Every event, joyful or sad, that took place in that house was important to all these worlds, but each had its own special reasons to rejoice or grieve over that occurrence independently of the others. For instance, Pierre's return was a joyful and important event, and they all felt it to be so. The servants, the most reliable judges of their masters because they judged not by their conversation or expressions of feeling but by their acts and way of life, were glad of Pierre's return because they knew that when he was there Count Nicholas would cease going every day to attend to the estate, and would be in better spirits and temper, and also because they would all receive handsome presents for the holidays. The children and their governesses were glad of Pierre's return because no one else drew them into the social life of the household as he did. He alone could play on the clavichord that écossaise, his only piece, to which, as he said, all possible dances could be danced, and they felt sure he had brought presents for them all. Young Nicholas, now a slim lad of 15, delicate and intelligent, with curly light brown hair and beautiful eyes, was delighted because Uncle Pierre, as he called him, was the object of his rapturous and passionate affection. No one had instilled into him this love for Pierre, whom he saw only occasionally. Countess Mary, who had brought him up, had done her utmost to make him love her husband as she loved him, and little Nicholas did love his uncle, but loved him with just a shade of contempt. Pierre, however, he adored. He did not want to be an hussar or a knight of St. George like his uncle Nicholas, he wanted to be learned, wise, and kind like Pierre. In Pierre's presence his face always shone with pleasure, and he flushed and was breathless when Pierre spoke to him. He did not miss a single word he uttered, and would afterwards, with Dessalles or by himself, recall and reconsider the meaning of everything Pierre had said. Pierre's past life and his unhappiness prior to 1812, of which young Nicholas had formed a vague poetic picture from some words he had overheard, his adventures in Moscow, his captivity, Platon Karateev, of whom he had heard from Pierre, his love for Natasha, of whom the lad was also particularly fond, and especially Pierre's friendship with the father whom Nicholas could not remember. All this made Pierre in his eyes a hero and a saint. From broken remarks about Natasha and his father, from the emotion with which Pierre spoke of that dead father, and from the careful, reverent tenderness with which Natasha spoke of him, the boy, who was only just beginning to guess what love is, derived the notion that his father had loved Natasha and when dying had left her to his friend. But the father whom the boy did not remember appeared to him a divinity who could not be pictured, and of whom he never thought without a swelling heart and tears of sadness and rapture. So the boy also was happy that Pierre had arrived. The guests welcomed Pierre because he always helped to enliven and unite any company he was in. The grown-up members of the family, not to mention his wife, were pleased to have back a friend whose presence made life run more smoothly and peacefully. The old ladies were pleased with the presents he brought them, and especially that Natasha would now be herself again. Pierre felt the different outlooks of these various worlds and made haste to satisfy all their expectations. Though the most absent-minded and forgetful of men, Pierre, with the aid of a list his wife drew up, had now bought everything, not forgetting his mother, and brother-in-law's commissions, nor the dress material for a present to Belova, nor toys for his wife's nephews. In the early days of his marriage it had seemed strange to him that his wife should expect him not to forget to procure all the things he undertook to buy, and he had been taken aback by her serious annoyance when on his first trip he forgot everything. But in time he grew used to this demand. Knowing that Natasha asked nothing for herself, and gave him commissions for others only when he himself had offered to undertake them, he now found an unexpected and childlike pleasure in this purchase of presents for everyone in the house, and never forgot anything. If he now incurred Natasha's censure it was only for buying too many and too expensive things. To her other defects, as most people thought them, but which to Pierre were qualities, of untidiness and neglect of herself, she now added stinginess. From the time that Pierre began life as a family man on a footing entailing heavy expenditure, he had noticed to his surprise that he spent only half as much as before, and that his affairs, which had been in disorder of late, chiefly because of his first wife's debts, had begun to improve. Life was cheaper because it was circumscribed, that most expensive luxury, the kind of life that can be changed at any moment, was no longer his, nor did he wish for it. He felt that his way of life had now been settled once for all till death, and that to change it was not in his power, and so that way of life proved economical. With a merry, smiling face Pierre was sorting his purchases. "What do you think of this?" said he, unrolling a piece of stuff like a shopman. Natasha, who was sitting opposite to him with her eldest daughter on her lap, turned her sparkling eyes swiftly from her husband to the things he showed her. "That's for Belova." "Excellent." She felt the quality of the material. "It was a ruble an arshin, I suppose?" Pierre told her the price. "Too dear," Natasha remarked. "How pleased the children will be, and Mama too. Only you need not have bought me this," she added, unable to suppress a smile as she gazed admiringly at a gold comb set with pearls, of a kind then just coming into fashion. "Adele tempted me, she kept on telling me to buy it," returned Pierre. "When am I to wear it?" and Natasha stuck it in her coil of hair. "When I take little Masha into society? Perhaps they will be fashionable again by then. Well, let's go now." And collecting the presents they went first to the nursery and then to the old countess' rooms. The countess was sitting with her companion Belova, playing grand patience as usual, when Pierre and Natasha came into the drawing room with parcels under their arms. The countess was now over 60, was quite grey, and wore a cap with a frill that surrounded her face. Her face had shriveled, her upper lip had sunk in, and her eyes were dim. After the deaths of her son and husband in such rapid succession, she felt herself a being accidentally forgotten in this world and left without aim or object for her existence. She ate, drank, slept, or kept awake, but did not live. Life gave her no new impressions. She wanted nothing from life but tranquility, and that tranquility only death could give her. But until death came she had to go on living, that is, to use her vital forces. A peculiarity one sees in very young children and very old people was particularly evident in her. Her life had no external aims, only a need to exercise her various functions and inclinations was apparent. She had to eat, sleep, think, speak, weep, work, give vent to her anger, and so on, merely because she had a stomach, a brain, muscles, nerves, and a liver. She did these things not under any external impulse as people in the full vigor of life do, when behind the purpose for which they strive, that of exercising their functions, remains unnoticed. She talked only because she physically needed to exercise her tongue and lungs. She cried as a child does, because her nose had to be cleared, and so on. What for people in their full vigor is an aim was for her evidently merely a pretext. Thus in the morning, especially if she had eaten anything rich the day before, she felt a need of being angry and would choose as the handiest pretext Belova's deafness. She would begin to say something to her in a low tone from the other end of the room. "It seems a little warmer today, my dear," she would murmur. And when Belova replied, "Oh yes, they've come," she would mutter angrily, "Oh Lord! How stupid and deaf she is." Another pretext would be her snuff, which would seem too dry or too damp or not rubbed fine enough. After these fits of irritability her face would grow yellow, and her maids knew by infallible symptoms when Belova would again be deaf, the snuff damp, and the countess' face yellow. Just as she needed to work off her spleen, so she had sometimes to exercise her still existing faculty of thinking, and the pretext for that was a game of patience. When she needed to cry, the deceased count would be the pretext. When she wanted to be agitated, Nicholas and his health would be the pretext, and when she felt a need to speak spitefully, the pretext would be Countess Mary. When her vocal organs needed exercise, which was usually towards 7 o'clock when she had had an after-dinner rest in a darkened room, the pretext would be the retelling of the same stories over and over again to the same audience. The old lady's condition was understood by the whole household, though no one ever spoke of it, and they all made every possible effort to satisfy her needs. Only by a rare glance exchanged with a sad smile between Nicholas, Pierre, Natasha, and Countess Mary was the common understanding of her condition expressed. But those glances expressed something more. They said that she had played her part in life, that what they now saw was not her whole self, that we must all become like her, and that they were glad to yield to her, to restrain themselves for this once precious being formerly as full of life as themselves, but now so much to be pitied. Memento mori, said these glances. Only the really heartless, the stupid ones of that household, and the little children failed to understand this and avoided her. Chapter 13. When Pierre and his wife entered the drawing-room, the Countess was in one of her customary states in which she needed the mental exertion of playing patience, and so, though by force of habit she greeted him with the words she always used when Pierre or her son returned after an absence, "High time, my dear, high time. We were all weary of waiting for you." "Well, thank God," and received her presents with another customary remark, "It's not the gift that's precious, my dear, but that you give it to me, an old woman." Yet it was evident that she was not pleased by Pierre's arrival at that moment when it diverted her attention from the unfinished game. She finished her game of patience and only then examined the presents. They consisted of a box for cards, of splendid workmanship, a bright blue Sèvres tea-cup with shepherdesses depicted on it and with a lid, and a gold snuff-box with the Count's portrait on the lid which Pierre had done by a miniaturist in Petersburg. The Countess had long wished for such a box, but as she did not want to cry just then she glanced indifferently at the portrait and gave her attention chiefly to the box for cards. "Thank you, my dear, you have cheered me up," said she as she always did. "But best of all you have brought yourself back, for I never saw anything like it. You ought to give your wife a scolding." "What are we to do with her? She is like a mad woman when you are away. Doesn't see anything, doesn't remember anything," she went on, repeating her usual phrases. "Look, Anna Timofeevna," she added to her companion, "see what a box for cards my son has brought us." Belova admired the presents and was delighted with her dress material. Though Pierre, Natasha, Nicholas, Countess Mary, and Denisov had much to talk about that they could not discuss before the old countess, not that anything was hidden from her, but because she had dropped so far behindhand in many things that had they begun to converse in her presence they would have had to answer inopportune questions and to repeat what they had already told her many times, that so-and-so was dead and so-and-so was married, which she would again be unable to remember, yet they sat at tea round the samovar in the drawing-room from habit, and Pierre answered the Countess' questions as to whether Prince Vasily had aged and whether Countess Mary Alexeyevna had sent greetings and still thought of them, and other matters that interested no one and to which she herself was indifferent. Conversation of this kind, interesting to no one yet unavoidable, continued all through tea-time. All the grown-up members of the family were assembled near the round tea table at which Sonia presided beside the samovar. The children with their tutors and governesses had had tea and their voices were audible from the next room. At tea all sat in their accustomed places, Nicholas beside the stove at a small table where his tea was handed to him, Milka, the old grey borzoi bitch, daughter of the first Milka, with a quite grey face and large black eyes that seemed more prominent than ever, lay on the armchair beside him, Denisov, whose curly hair, mustache, and whiskers had turned half grey, sat beside Countess Mary with his general's tunic unbuttoned. Pierre sat between his wife and the old countess. He spoke of what he knew might interest the old lady and that she could understand. He told her of external social events and of the people who had formed the circle of her contemporaries and had once been a real, living, and distinct group, but who were now for the most part scattered about the world and like herself were garnering the last ears of the harvests they had sown in earlier years. But to the old countess those contemporaries of hers seemed to be the only serious and real society. Natasha saw by Pierre's animation that his visit had been interesting and that he had much to tell them but dare not say it before the old countess. Denisov, not being a member of the family, did not understand Pierre's caution and being, as a malcontent, much interested in what was occurring in Petersburg, kept urging Pierre to tell them about what had happened in the Semenovsk regiment, then about Arakcheev, and then about the Bible Society. Once or twice Pierre was carried away and began to speak of these things, but Nicholas and Natasha always brought him back to the health of Prince Ivan and Countess Mary Alexeyevna. "Well, and all this idiocy, Gosner and Tatarinova?" Denisov asked. "Is that really still going on?" "Going on?" Pierre exclaimed. "Why more than ever? The Bible Society is the whole government now." "What is that, mon cher ami?" asked the countess, who had finished her tea and evidently needed a pretext for being angry after her meal. What are you saying about the government? I don't understand. Well, you know, Maman, Nicholas interposed, knowing how to translate things into his mother's language. Prince Alexander Golitsyn has founded a society and in consequence has great influence, they say. Arakcheev and Golitsyn, incautiously remarked Pierre, are now the whole government. And what a government! They see treason everywhere and are afraid of everything. Well, and how is Prince Alexander to blame? He is a most estimable man. I used to meet him at Mary Antonovna's, said the countess in an offended tone, and still more offended that they all remained silent. She went on, nowadays everyone finds fault. A gospel society. Well, and what harm is there in that? And she rose, everybody else got up too, and with a severe expression sailed back to her table in the sitting room. The melancholy silence that followed was broken by the sounds of the children's voices and laughter from the next room. Evidently some jolly excitement was going on there. Finished, finished, little Natasha's gleeful yell rose above them all. Pierre exchanged glances with Countess Mary and Nicholas. Natasha he never lost sight of, and smiled happily. That's delightful music, said he. It means that Anna Makarovna has finished her stocking, said Countess Mary. Oh, I'll go and see, said Pierre, jumping up. You know, he added, stopping at the door, why I'm especially fond of that music. It is always the first thing that tells me all is well. When I was driving here today, the nearer I got to the house the more anxious I grew. As I entered the anteroom I heard Andrusha's peals of laughter and that meant that all was well. I know that feeling, said Nicholas. But I mustn't go there, those stockings are to be a surprise for me. Pierre went to the children, and the shouting and laughter grew still louder. Come, Anna Makarovna, Pierre's voice was heard saying, come here into the middle of the room and at the word of command, 1, 2, and when I say, 3. You stand here, and you in my arms, well now. 1, 2, said Pierre, and a silence followed, 3, and a rapturously breathless cry of children's voices filled the room. 2, 2, they shouted. This meant 2 stockings, which by a secret process known only to herself Anna Makarovna used to knit at the same time on the same needles, and which, when they were ready, she always triumphantly drew, one out of the other, in the children's presence. Chapter 14. Soon after this the children came in to say good night. They kissed everyone, the tutors and governesses made their bows, and they went out. Only young Nicholas and his tutor remained. Dessalles whispered to the boy to come downstairs. No, Monsieur Dessalles, I will ask my aunt to let me stay, replied Nicholas Bolkonsky also in a whisper. Ma tante, please let me stay, said he, going up to his aunt. His face expressed entreaty, agitation, and ecstasy. Countess Mary glanced at him and turned to Pierre. When you are here he can't tear himself away, she said. I will bring him to you directly, Monsieur Dessalles. Good night, said Pierre, giving his hand to the Swiss tutor, and he turned to young Nicholas with a smile. You and I haven't seen anything of one another yet. How like he is growing, Mary, he added, addressing Countess Mary. Like my father, asked the boy, flushing crimson and looking up at Pierre with bright, ecstatic eyes. Pierre nodded, and went on with what he had been saying when the children had interrupted. Countess Mary sat down doing woolwork. Natasha did not take her eyes off her husband. Nicholas and Denisov rose, asked for their pipes, smoked, went to fetch more tea from Sonia, who sat weary but resolute at the samovar, and questioned Pierre. The curly-headed, delicate boy sat with shining eyes unnoticed in a corner, starting every now and then and muttering something to himself, and evidently experiencing a new and powerful emotion as he turned his curly head, with his thin neck exposed by his turned-down collar, toward the place where Pierre sat. The conversation turned on the contemporary gossip about those in power, in which most people see the chief interest of home politics. Denisov, dissatisfied with the government on account of his own disappointments in the service, heard with pleasure of the things done in Petersburg which seemed to him stupid, and made forcible and sharp comments on what Pierre told them. One used to have to be a German, now one must dance with Tatarinova and Madame Kudner, and we'd Eket Shazan and the Bwethwen. Oh, they should let that fine fellow Bonaparte loose, he'd knock all this nonsense out of them. Fancy giving the command of the Semenov regiment to a fellow like that Shwatizi, he cried. Nicholas, though free from Denisov's readiness to find fault with everything, also thought that discussion of the government was a very serious and weighty matter, and the fact that he had been appointed minister of this and be governor-general of that, and that the emperor had said so and this minister so, seemed to him very important. And so he thought it necessary to take an interest in these things and to question Pierre. The questions put by these two kept the conversation from changing its ordinary character of gossip about the higher government circles. But Natasha, knowing all her husband's ways and ideas, saw that he had long been wishing but had been unable to divert the conversation to another channel and express his own deeply felt idea, for the sake of which he had gone to Petersburg to consult with his new friend Prince Theodore, and she helped him by asking how his affairs with Prince Theodore had gone. "What was it about?" asked Nicholas. "Always the same thing," said Pierre, looking round at his listeners. "Everybody sees that things are going so badly that they cannot be allowed to go on so, and that it is the duty of all decent men to counteract it as far as they can." "What can decent men do?" Nicholas inquired, frowning slightly. "What can be done?" "Why, this. Come into my study," said Nicholas. Natasha, who had long expected to be fetched to nurse her baby, now heard the nurse calling her and went to the nursery. Countess Mary followed her. The men went into the study and little Nicholas Bolkonsky followed them unnoticed by his uncle and sat down at the writing table in a shady corner by the window. "Well, what would you do?" asked Denisov. "Always some fantastic schemes," said Nicholas. "Why this," began Pierre, not sitting down but pacing the room, sometimes stopping short, gesticulating, and lisping. "The position in Petersburg is this: the emperor does not look into anything. He has abandoned himself altogether to this mysticism." Pierre could not tolerate mysticism in anyone now. "He seeks only for peace, and only these people sans foini loi asterisk can give it him, people who recklessly hack at and strangle everything, Magnitsky, Arakcheev, and tutti quanti. You will agree that if you did not look after your estates yourself but only wanted a quiet life, the harsher your steward was the more readily your object might be attained," he said to Nicholas. Asterisk without faith or law. "Well, what does that lead up to?" said Nicholas. "Well, everything is going to ruin. Robbery in the law courts, in the army nothing but flogging, drilling, and military settlements, the people are tortured, enlightenment is suppressed. All that is young and honest is crushed. Everyone sees that this cannot go on. Everything is strained to such a degree that it will certainly break," said Pierre, as those who examine the actions of any government have always said since governments began. "I told them just one thing in Petersburg." "Told whom?" "Well, you know whom," said Pierre, with a meaning glance from under his brows. "Prince Theodore and all those. To encourage culture and philanthropy is all very well, of course. The aim is excellent, but in the present circumstances something else is needed." At that moment Nicholas noticed the presence of his nephew. His face darkened and he went up to the boy. "Why are you here?" "Why?" "Let him be," said Pierre, taking Nicholas by the arm and continuing. "That is not enough, I told them. Something else is needed. When you stand expecting the overstrained string to snap at any moment, when everyone is expecting the inevitable catastrophe, as many as possible must join hands as closely as they can to withstand the general calamity. Everything that is young and strong is being enticed away and depraved. One is lured by women, another by honors, a third by ambition or money, and they go over to that camp. No independent men, such as you or I, are left. What I say is widen the scope of our society, let the mot order be not virtue alone but independence and action as well." Nicholas, who had left his nephew, irritably pushed up an armchair, sat down in it, and listened to Pierre, coughing discontentedly and frowning more and more. "But action with what aim?" he cried. "And what position will you adopt toward the government?" "Why, the position of assistance. The society need not be secret if the government allows it. Not merely is it not hostile to government, but it is a society of true conservatives, a society of gentlemen in the full meaning of that word. It is only to prevent some Pugachev or other from killing my children and yours, and Arakchev from sending me off to some military settlement. We join hands only for the public welfare and the general safety. Yes, but it's a secret society and therefore a hostile and harmful one which can only cause harm. Why? Did the Tugendbund which saved Europe, they did not then venture to suggest that Russia had saved Europe, do any harm? The Tugendbund is an alliance of virtue, it is love, mutual help, it is what Christ preached on the cross. Natasha, who had come in during the conversation, looked joyfully at her husband. It was not what he was saying that pleased her, that did not even interest her, for it seemed to her that was all extremely simple and that she had known it a long time. It seemed so to her because she knew that it sprang from Pierre's whole soul, but it was his animated and enthusiastic appearance that made her glad. The boy with the thin neck stretching out from the turned-down collar, whom everyone had forgotten, gazed at Pierre with even greater and more rapturous joy. Every word of Pierre's burned into his heart, and with a nervous movement of his fingers he unconsciously broke the sealing wax and quill pens his hands came upon on his uncle's table. It is not at all what you suppose, but that is what the German Tugendbund was, and what I am proposing. No, my Fwiend. The Tugendbund is all very well for the sausage-eaters, but I don't understand it and can't even pronounce it, interposed Denisov in a loud and resolute voice. I agree that everything here is rotten and horrible, but the Tugendbund I don't understand. If we're not satisfied, let us have a bund of our own. That's all right. Je suis vote Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm your man. Pierre smiled, Natasha began to laugh, but Nicholas knitted his brows still more and began proving to Pierre that there was no prospect of any great change and that all the danger he spoke of existed only in his imagination. Pierre maintained the contrary, and as his mental faculties were greater and more resourceful, Nicholas felt himself cornered. This made him still angrier, for he was fully convinced, not by reasoning but by something within him stronger than reason, of the justice of his opinion. I will tell you this, he said, rising and trying with nervously twitching fingers to prop up his pipe in a corner, but finally abandoning the attempt. I can't prove it to you. You say that everything here is rotten and that an overthrow is coming, I don't see it. But you also say that our oath of allegiance is a conditional matter, and to that I reply, you are my best friend, as you know, but if you formed a secret society and began working against the government, be it what it may, I know it is my duty to obey the government. And if Arakchev ordered me to lead a squadron against you and cut you down, I should not hesitate an instant, but should do it. And you may argue about that as you like. An awkward silence followed these words. Natasha was the first to speak, defending her husband and attacking her brother. Her defense was weak and inept but she attained her object. The conversation was resumed, and no longer in the unpleasantly hostile tone of Nicholas' last remark. When they all got up to go into supper, little Nicholas Bolkonsky went up to Pierre, pale and with shining, radiant eyes. Uncle Pierre, you know. If Papa were alive, would he agree with you? He asked. And Pierre suddenly realized what a special, independent, complex, and powerful process of thought and feeling must have been going on in this boy during that conversation, and remembering all he had said he regretted that the lad should have heard him. He had, however, to give him an answer. Yes, I think so, he said reluctantly, and left the study. The lad looked down and seemed now for the first time to notice what he had done to the things on the table. He flushed and went up to Nicholas. Uncle, forgive me, I did that, unintentionally, he said, pointing to the broken sealing wax and pens. Nicholas started angrily. All right, he said, throwing the bits under the table. And evidently suppressing his vexation with difficulty, he turned away from the boy. You ought not to have been here at all, he said.